are the four elements, or elephants, elephants in the tasting room. There's a slip right at the beginning. The four things we shouldn't, that we don't talk about but should when it comes to the taste of wine. Why is geology and rocks, why are they both overrated when it comes to influencing the taste of wine? And how do dead bugs and rotting leaves have a profound impact on wine? Well, tonight you're going to get those stories and tips and more with our guest, whom I'll introduce momentarily. But if you're watching this video on the replay, please get into the comments and type the word replay. Let me know where you're logging in from, what's in your glass. And of course, if you're here on the live stream, I want to hear from you. I'm Natalie McLean. You've just joined one of the most passionate groups of wine lovers who gather every Tuesday at 7 p.m. Eastern to talk to the most interesting people in the world of wine. Now, I am live streaming this for the first time, but it's based on a recording I made for my podcast, Unreserved Wine Talk. But I will be here live in the comments, so get in there and let us know what tips or stories are you enjoying, what questions do you still have. All right, and before I introduce my guest, just let me say that two of you are going to win a copy of his terrific book. All you have to do is email me at natalie@nataliemclean.com and let me know that you'd like to win a copy. I'll choose two people randomly from those who contact me. All right, back to our guest. Alex Maltman is an emeritus professor of earth scientists at Aberystwyth University in Wales, United Kingdom. Along with a decorated career in university teaching and research, Alex has grown vines and made wine in his home for 50 years. Through this, he became very interested in vineyard geology and its fashionable but poorly understood relationship with wine. Alex has contributed to the Oxford Companion to Wine and to the World Atlas of Wine, and is the author of the acclaimed book, Vineyards, Rocks and Soils, A Wine Lover's Guide to Geology. And his new book is Taste the Limestone, Smell the Slate, A Geologist Wanders Through the World of Wine, which I just love and we're going to talk about. He joins us now from his home in Wales. Welcome, Alex. So good to have you here with us.
Well, thank you, Natalie. It's a pleasure indeed. And hello to everyone who's listening or watching. A pleasure to talk with you.
Absolutely. We're going to dive right into it because you have got so much ground to cover. I'll try not to do the puns. All right, here we go. When did you first become fascinated with rocks and hills and geology, Alex?
Well, that's way back. Let's see. Well, I was born and brought up in the fine old city of York in the north of England. And as a kid, I was very interested in cycling. And York's a great place for cycling because it's flat. But if you cycle out across the plain, the so-called Vale of York, you inevitably hit some hills. And suddenly the gradient goes up and you've got to pedal. And I've always had a curious mind. And so I started thinking, well, what's changed here? Why do I suddenly have to go up this great slope? And as best you could in those days, I looked at books in the public library and found out about something called bedrock and erosion. And I thought, well, this is neat. And I think that was part of the reason things started. And the other part, as is so often the case, is I had a good teacher. Not so much a teacher who taught me geology. This is primary school now. He didn't do geology. But this fellow, I guess it was his hobby, he'd bring in rocks from time to time, special rocks, and enthuse about them. And whoa, I was entranced by this. And occasionally he'd bring in a fossil, and I'd look at this thing. This is a creature that lived 100 million. Whoa! And so when the time came for me to go to university, well, geology was the thing to study. It was a natural, for reasons like that.
Wow, that's terrific. I love that. Often it is a teacher, isn't it? So you also had an early interest in the Beatles, and I don't mean the ground bugs, but the rock band. So from rocks in the ground to rock stars, what got you interested in the Beatles?
Where did you get that from? Oh, yeah, it's true.
A little bird told me.
All right, okay. Well. Well, I'm of a certain age, and that I feel privileged to have been just entering my teens when all youngsters suddenly get interested in their music, when rock and roll broke. And most of the early American rock and roll stars did tour Britain, and I had the gumption to go and see them. And so apart from Elvis Presley, I have seen all the great early rock stars. I loved it. It was so exciting. But then, of course, as the song famously put it, one day the music died. 1959. It was all over, and suddenly things were pretty deadly on that front until I witnessed a second explosion, the Beatles. And guess what? When that exploded, 1962 or so, I was just going to university. Guess where? Liverpool. Yep.
How convenient.
So I studied geology for 4 years at the University of Liverpool, just at that time, the middle 60s. And so I saw it all firsthand. I went to the clubs, the Merseybeat clubs, the famous Cavern. I saw the Beatles, and it was just so electrifying. It was so new, and wow, how could you not get excited by it? And so I've followed that kind of music ever since, really. It was so epoch-making. The Beatles did so many innovative things, not just the music. It's hard to look back and appreciate now, but I witnessed it firsthand, so it was great.
Wow, you did have a curious mind, so I can see that being a natural extension and fitting all together. So your career trajectory spans, of course, from geology professor now to wine writer, wine author. What sparked your initial interest in wine? Because you've been growing your own vines for, I believe, 50 years.
Oh, well, the wine thing also goes way back, really, because I think I can remember as a little boy in York, and we didn't have any wine in our house. It was an alien thing. I didn't really know what it was. But I can remember pressing my nose against a shop window that sold wine, looking at these bottles. Oh, what are they? What's in there? Look at those labels. Look at the names. And I was just seduced by these exotic sounding names. What on earth's going on? And I think a little seed was sown such that when I got old enough to be buying bottles of wine, when I was at university, and particularly postgraduate studies, suddenly that seed germinated, and this is interesting. And that curiosity kicked in again, so I bought books and read about it. And that's important because I can now look back at those books and see how things have changed. And my goodness, the wine world has changed over that 50 years, the way it's seen. And I look back at those 1960s books, and there weren't many of them back then. It's almost a different world, really. And so that's how the wine thing got started, and of course it's been there ever since. And the curiosity led me to want to visit wineries and vineyards, talk to the winemaker. Well, how do you do this then? And I was always asking questions. But the important thing in retrospect is that there was never any purpose. I never had a goal. It was just a hobby. It was just fun. And I never knew I was accumulating information, and I never dreamed that one day I would be writing about it. But one thing led to another. When I came to the university here in Wales and bought a property out in the country, started to garden, grow vegetables, well, I was curious about that. Why do you lime the soil before you plant brassicas? What's that all about then? I was always asking questions, and it was natural for me to plant some grapevines. So again, questions, and attempt to make wine, which I did, like you said, for a long time now, 50 years or so, and that's taught me so much. And so what I think happened in retrospect was, inadvertently, these various strands were developing about agriculture and about wine and about winemaking, and all the time I had the geology.
Right.
And in some ways I think that's the most difficult part, because geology I always think is a difficult subject to pick up quickly. By its nature, things don't lend themselves to snappy definitions. Well, I had that. So when this fashion came about for vineyard geology, oh, wait a minute, I know about this stuff. I'm on it. And so I decided to write some articles, little things in magazines first of all, and that's relatively recently, last 15 years or something like that. And of course that is recent history. But how I came to be where I am, writing about this after a long career in pure geology, if you wish, was the coming together of these different strands which were developing all along. Then suddenly they crystallized, and I retired. I took early retirement from university when I was 60, so I now had the scope to put some of these ideas I was developing into writing, and I did that, and here I am.
Here we are. Wow. And of course, you have been busy writing. This is your second book. Your previous book, Vineyards, Rocks, and Soils, was praised for its scientific approach. So how does this new book that we'll be talking about...
Here we are.
That's the first book up on camera. And for those listening, we'll put a link in the show notes to both books so that you can order them. So how are the two books different? Because they both have that sort of vineyard rock geology focus. But,
I see myself as a vineyard geologist, really.
Okay.
So when this fashion for talking about soil in wine, which is not in these books I mentioned from the 1960s, soil wasn't mentioned back then, or barely. It's a fairly new fashion, last 20 years. I began seeing so many things to do with vineyard geology that were just plain wrong. And I thought, well, I've got to write a book, or try and write a book, that explains things from first principles. So that earlier book is essentially a textbook, developing things bit by bit through the book. So if anybody can be bothered to read it through, because it is kind of technical in places, though I try to make it readable, it's essentially a textbook.
Okay.
And also I would like to think a reference book. And so if some professional winemaker wants to find out what some geological term means, well, I know full well that AI won't do it for you. So there's a good index in the book, and you can look in the book, and hopefully it gives you a nice rounded explanation of what that geological principle or term means. So essentially that first book is a textbook come reference book. The new book, I like to think, is more of a reading book, a dip in and read book. There are 18 chapters. 12 of them have already been published in wine magazines, particularly the World of Fine Wine magazine, which gives
publication.
It is, and it gives me the scope to develop things at some length, more lengthy than most magazines will let. So I like that. So over the years I've done a number of articles for them, and then I wrote 6 additional chapters of the same length, same style, to make this book of 18 chapters, most of which are self-standing. So I think the reader can dip into any chapter and start reading that chapter, and it's complete in itself, and then jump in due course to a different chapter. So it's a dip in and read book. I think inadvertently I'm explaining geology along the way in a gentle way, in a more readable way, but that's the difference really. The new one is a dip in and read book.
Which is great, because that's exactly, the kind of book we love to talk about on this podcast. So you mentioned in your preface to this new book the seminal article you published about wine and geology that garnered unexpected international attention. Give us some examples of the reactions to that article.
Well, yeah, I was staggered by that. I've got to say that little article, 2003, I think it was, that started it all, was really my effort to put into print some thoughts I'd been developing for some time, and which really are the basis for the final chapter in the new book, which expanded.
Sure.
And I'd been thinking for some time that there's a very curious thing here, and still is. The role of geology in the vineyard and in wine is much trumpeted and loved and written about, as it is to some extent with whiskey. Scotch whiskey and Kentucky, Tennessee, the more artisan distilleries, they like to talk about the geology as well. And as with wine, I don't really think it holds up to scrutiny very well. It sounds good, but as we'll probably talk about, I'm not sure it's all this trumpeting business is justified. But yet there is a drink which I would argue geology is pivotal for, and certainly was historically, and that's beer.
Oh, really? Why so? Beer, not whiskey?
Well, we're digressing a bit here. Well, essentially because of the role of water.
Okay.
Many breweries have their own water supply, and that is well water, comes out of the ground, where the water has sat for centuries probably in an aquifer. It's dissolved anything that will dissolve in the aquifer, so sometimes these waters are loaded with things dissolved, and that influences how the brewer goes about brewing his beer and the kind of beer that emerges at the end of it. We might come on in due course to the selectivity that vine roots have in taking up vine nutrients. They only take up certain things which they need and want, and they reject other things. Well, this brewing water, everything's in it, including things like sulfate, chloride, carbonate, bicarbonate, things that vines don't take up. But these things are crucial to the taste of beer and the style of beer. And to cut a very long story short, we can talk more about it if you wish, but it's the last chapter of this book. The reason why pale ales and the now very fashionable India Pale Ale developed in the English Midlands is everything to do with the geology there and the kind of water it yielded. The reason why lager developed on the European continent, and particularly in the Czech Republic, particularly in a place called Pilsene, it was now the Czech Republic, and gave rise to the Pilsen, or the Pils style of beer, is everything to do with the geology there. And indeed, Vienna, the reason you get dark stouts in Dublin, porter in London, is because of the water, which is because of the geology. So like I said, absolutely pivotal, but never talked about. You never read about geology and beer. But as I've outlined,
anyway.
Whereas it's with wine that you hear all this stuff, and I think that's really quite hard to justify. So that's what this article was about. Kind of brief, succinct article. I didn't even know if the magazine would publish it, but yes, they did. And it seems
so what did people say in response? Like, were there winemakers saying,
well, they wanted information. What had happened was the publishers put out a press release, and somehow this press release got into the global system. So suddenly I got emails, this was the early days of emails, from literally all over the world. People asking me, more, what else have you published? Tell us more about this, and what do you think about this? And blah, blah, blah. Wow. And the interest, in contrast with all the articles I'd published before then in pure geology, highfalutin, technical, academic, arcane stuff that only a handful of people ever read, and there were people who knew what I was doing anyway, so you get no response from that sort of stuff. Suddenly, whoa, I've hit a red hot button here, and there was no looking back. So that's what started it all. People wanted to know more. I'd found a niche. So I thought, well, I've got more to offer, so I will write more articles. So I did.
You did. And the book's title, Taste the Limestone, Smell the Slate, it seems to have a bit of irony to it, because you're saying geology is so overrated when it comes to wine taste. There are other factors. Was this intentional?
No, not really. I mean, you're dead right now I look at it that way. It is a bit ironic. No, essentially I wanted it to be eye-catching.
Okay.
I mean, the real title of the book is the subtitle that you did read out, A Geologist Wanders Through the World of Wine, and that wanders reflects, I think, the eclectic nature of the different chapters. That's the real title, but that's awfully
great
dull.
Title and subtitle.
So we've got to have a more eye-catching title, so I
Yes.
came up with this, even though I argue eventually and summarize in the epilogue at the end that you can't really taste limestone in wine, you can't smell slate, or any other rock for that matter. I just thought it was an eye-grabbing headline, and so that's what we
Definitely
went
was.
with. The publishers
Caught my
liked
eye.
it. They thought,
Yeah.
oh, that's a great title, so let's do it. I never really thought about the irony, but I suppose it is.
Oh, maybe I see most things as ironic in life. So let's dive right into chapter 15, which is like a really good, juicy, meaty, controversial one. The four elements in the tasting room.
All right. Elephants.
Elephants, not
Yeah,
elements. Yeah, I'm thinking of minerals and rocks. Okay,
Yeah, yeah.
the four elephants in the tasting room. Elephant,
Yeah.
of course, being something you never talk about, but you should. Now, you argue that wine lovers and critics give too much weight to geology influencing the taste of wine. So let's do some definitions first, so that we don't get completely tangled and confused. Starting with minerality.
Oh,
So, if I understand, you can correct me after I give my little spiel here, but there are three definitions that I think get confused when it comes to minerals and minerality. Number one, minerals in solid rock form that are inaccessible to vine roots, like they can't take up those minerals. Number two, minerals in the form of nutrients in organic matter that are maybe like the vitamins we take as humans that vines can access. And number three, minerality, which is really a whimsical adjective that people use to describe wine, but inaccurately is linked to tasting actual minerals, which you can't do. Rather, it's probably related to some textural sensation or something, or acidity, I don't know what. But are those kind of the three sort of aspects of minerality and how they all get mixed up?
well, certainly minerality for the last part, the taste
Yes.
perception thing. We don't use minerality in the other context. Yeah, that's pretty much it. I tend to use the word geological mineral for
Okay.
those compounds that are making half of the vineyard soil and that come together to make rocks. And nutrient mineral, which are single elements which we need as well as vines in order to function. And it is true that the nutrient minerals or potential nutrient minerals are there in the geological minerals, but they're locked in, sharing electrons and things like that. And things have to happen to release them and make them accessible to the vine roots. I would guess we will talk more about this in due course. But then recently this new thing has come up, mineral in wine, the taste, and this word minerality, which somebody concocted a couple of decades ago, but with huge effect. And everybody talks now about, oh yes, mineral, I'm getting mineral in it. But as you said, that's a taste perception. I don't know what it means or what causes it, but that's, yeah, a different third meaning of the word mineral. You've got geological minerals, nutrient minerals, and this rather vague taste perception adjective.
Yeah, some whimsical type of metaphor. So you make the point, again, just to clarify, geological minerals have no taste or smell because they don't dissolve or vaporize. What research supports, okay, and the concept of minerality. Okay, so I think we got that. So let's talk rock. You put it into context. The Earth is 4.6 billion years old, yet the layers of rock that we like to talk about, like Kimmeridgian rock from the Jurassic period, they were created very late in the game, 0.6 billion years ago. You also make the,
Not
is that
quite, but
something?
okay.
correct or whatever.
157 million years ago. But anyway, go on.
Yep, yep.
Don't get me going on geological age. What is the relevance of geological age to the growing vine in the bedrock? Kimmeridgian, that's a whole different podcast on its own.
Yes.
Geological age is fun and nice to talk about, but it's not relevant to
Irrelevant.
viticulture.
Right.
And let's
I
be
was
clear on
thinking
one
that.
point. The soil,
Yeah.
the disintegrated matter on top of the bedrock that the vine is growing in, is vastly younger and unrelated to the geological age of the bedrock I mean, at Kimmeridge, say, for example, you mentioned this at Chablis, say, sure, the bedrock formed 157 million years ago in Kimmeridgian times, part of Jurassic times, but the soil didn't form then. The soil has been forming over the last few tens of thousands of years and is still forming now, developing, evolving, compacting, leaching and whatnot. In other words, to put it bluntly, the famous Kimmeridgian soil of Chablis isn't Kimmeridgian in the sense of an age. It's modern, it's present day, and this applies around the world when people like to talk about how old their vineyard soils are. Well, they're not.
Vineyard. In whatever,
well, they're not that old. The soils are, even the very oldest soils in Australia, South Africa, Uruguay, are only 1 million or maybe 2 million. Oh, sounds a lot. But geologically, they're young. But the point is they're unrelated to the geological age of the bedrock. So I could go on for a long time about the misunderstandings about geological time and geological ages. Oh, there is a chapter in the book, I don't know which number it is, on geological time and how it works. But yeah, that's a whole different topic, really. I digressed a little.
That's okay. I like digressions and wanderings through this topic. I love this provocative statement. Telling me that a wine comes from a certain type of rock tells me nothing about that wine. So why do many...
That's provocative.
Well, it is for many wine lovers.
Yeah, I suppose.
Who like to talk about whatever, the schist and shale and all of that.
Oh, they do, of course. Sounds good.
So why do so many wine drinkers and writers love to talk about geology, whether it's limestone, shale, schist, clay. What makes it so attractive? Is it just because it's tangible, understandable?
Well, let's go back to this provocative statement first of all.
Yeah.
Let me put it this way, Natalie. If I present you with an anonymous bottle of, I'd say, red wine, and all I tell you about it is it was grown on the vines were growing on schist soils. What does that mean to you? What do you expect from that wine because it was grown on schist soils?
Well, I don't associate wine styles and soil types, so nothing to me.
People do.
Someone who does, might.
Well, I see. There's plenty of quotations in the book. The granite soils give the wine a tension and energy, or something like this. Yeah. Or this wine has a finesse because of the granite soils, the other way around. Sure. But granite soils, say, they're common around the wine world. All kinds of wine are made on granite soils. All kinds of cultivars grow in them. All kinds of wine styles. And so what is granite bringing to a wine? Well, I don't know. I don't get it. I can't see any commonality between, say, let's take a northern France example. You get your full, rich Hermitage, Northern Rhone wines, Cornas, they're on, not all Hermitage is on granite actually, but much of it is. You get that style, and then just not far away, Beaujolais, part of Beaujolais is granite. Is that the same style of wine? Well, quite.
Almost polar opposite.
Well, glad you say that. So saying that, this wine was produced from granite soils, well, how is that helpful in view of what we just said? And I could go through the same argument with all the other rocks too. They're so diverse around the world that I just don't think it's helpful. I like reading it. Oh, I see, granite soil, that's an interesting piece of information. But I would maintain it doesn't tell me anything about the wine.
Mm-hmm. No, makes so much sense. So then, back to why do we keep obsessing about it? Because it's tangible, because it's visible?
Yeah, I think there are a lot of reasons actually, and that's certainly part of it. I think what happens here is that people look at, shall we say, a hill slope with vines on it, and they say that year after year the wines from here always taste different to the wines from there. Well, what's different? It's obviously all the same climate on this even hill slope, so what's different in making the wine in the same way? Oh, it's the soil. And as you said, you can see the soil, so people pick up on the soil and say it's the soil that's doing it. But here's the thing that bugs me all through this. Nobody says how the soil does it. How does the soil make that difference? We can come back to nutrients and things if you wish, but basically we don't understand how the soil's going to make this difference. But at the same time, there's a whole host of invisible factors operating on that hill slope that vary on a fine scale that we're not aware of unless anyone's taken the time and the money and the effort to put in closely spaced sensors and measure temperature, say, over time, through a day, through a season, over the years. And whenever this has been done, factors to do with, say, climate, and there are a lot of factors in there, are varying on a scale that we just wouldn't imagine by looking at the hill slope. It only takes a slight declivity in the hill slope, a slight change of orientation, a slight change in the orientation of the vine rows, a low wall, some bushes, to change the airflow. The airflow changes humidity, it changes the temperature, and in fact the whole thing is much more variable than we would ever imagine because these factors are invisible. And we know these factors influence how grapes ripen and how the flavour precursors in the grape develop, which are going to go on to in the fermentation make the wine taste like it does. We know how those things work, unlike the soil, but we don't consider them, partly because they're invisible and partly because they're technical, and who wants to read about diurnal temperature ranges and things like that? Geology has charisma. Granite soils, limestone, it's got charisma. That's what people like, even though I suggest we really don't know how these different soils do it. And so I think that's a big reason. And another reason, which I develop in chapter 2 in the book, about the long and I think rather romantic discovery of photosynthesis, is that the idea that wine is made from the soil because vines grow by eating the soil was with us literally for millennia, for centuries. It more or less started with Aristotle, who was a very influential writer, and when the medieval church came in and said, oh yes, wine is of the soil, and they noticed that vines grew by eating the soil and taking up water from the soil in just the same way that animals drink water and eat food. It's just the same sort of thing. But plants don't develop the smelly waste matter that animals do. Why is this? God must be directly involved. God is directing vines to grow. And as for the fermentation, as we would call it now, as for the transition of grape juice to this noble liquid we call wine, how does that happen? This is God's hand doing it. Wine is God's gift from the earth, and this was the teaching of the all-powerful medieval church. It became the dogma. And I can't help thinking it almost got into our genes. And so although eventually photosynthesis was step by step discovered, not that long ago actually, the word photosynthesis, as I recall in the book, was coined in 1893. That's not that long ago as these things go in the development of science. I think that heritage, that legacy of wine is of the soil, it hasn't completely gone. So when you check that box as well as the other things we've just said, and the great thing about terroir, provenance, the need to know where a foodstuff, and especially wine, came from. Right. On top of that, origin, it's a backlash against anonymous industrial foodstuffs. If you know precisely where it came from, that's big tick in the box.
That should
and
tell you something about the product.
Yeah, and here, if we're saying it, we not only know where it came from the soil. Well, how viscerally satisfying is that? And so another big box tick. So I think it's a whole lot of reasons coming together that, I completely get it, why people just love the idea that wine is tasting of limestone and schist. And it's charismatic, it's romantic, and I get that. And I don't want to spoil the fun. It pains me really as a geologist to say, my subject, wait a minute, is it that important? How does it do it? And when I look at the interactions between vine roots and soil, I can't see how it does it. And so for these reasons, I think, yeah, good story, but let's take a step back and rein in a bit. Is it that important? If it is, tell me why, tell me how, and nobody ever has done.
No, I think, it's great for PR, romance brochures and
Of course it
publicity
is.
kinds of releases. But I also think, if we know where someone came from, not just they're Canadian, but that they came from the East Coast, then that's going to tell us something about who they are. And we want to know the same about what we consume. Like, this is a wine from that place, therefore it must taste like this. And we just want that connection, as you say. And then is there a further, you mentioned terroir, that fancy French term that combines climate, soil, winemaking decisions. But
Yep.
people sort of get that mixed up, meaning terroir, terre of the earth, terra firma.
Yes,
all that
yes.
stuff, right? Like
Yes, you've hit the nail on the head there. But yeah, I think probably less so now. But in recent years, a lot of people said terroir means terre, the French word terre, which means the earth. Well, it doesn't. It never has done. It's more like territory, really. And I've had a book for a long, long time called Cuisine de terroir, the cooking of the terroir, foods of the terroir. Well, that's not soil. There are books on literature of terroir, how this place affects authors and the way they think and the way they write. And there's a lot of other books on this, that and the other, and terroir. Well, that sure isn't just soil. And so I think people were misled in equating terroir with the soil. That's just one part of it, as you rightly said. And in any case, doing that, it undermines the value of the word terroir, which sums up all the relevant factors in a place without specifying which ones are more important than something else, because that might vary from place to place anyway. And so it's such a useful word. To me, it's self-evident. I mean, as a gardener, some crops always do better in some parts of my garden than other parts of my garden. Why? Because there's an apple tree shading the sunlight here, or the drainage or something. Well, terroir sums it all up in a single word, and so it's a very valuable word. And I think that value is rather lost if we suddenly distill it down to just meaning soil, earth.
And yet, when I go on a winery visit, a number of winery visits, I'm taken to the pit. And that is where they've excavated an area, I don't know, 6-7 feet down. And we have a look at how long the vines go down. And that's because they're getting deeper and deeper nutrients. But is that just the search for water? What are those vines doing? I mean, that just seems to be a classic winery move to show you the pit.
Yeah, that's a great point. I'm glad you raised that, Natalie, because when I'm saying vineyard geology is overhyped, I'm talking about the wine in our glass. Am I tasting the limestone, smelling the slate? And I'm saying, no, you can't. But I'm not for one moment saying that geology is overhyped in the vineyard. It's a very different situation for the grower. Okay. The grower needs to know about his soil, how deep it is, what are its properties, what are its water properties in particular. Do I need to dig trenches, put in drains? Do I need to irrigate? What rootstock will be important for... We've drifted a bit from the 4 elephants in the room, haven't we? But anyway,
yes, we have.
What rootstock and what spacing of the vines? How am I going to trellis and how am I going to manage it? The geology will influence so many things in the vineyard. So the grower may well want to dig soil pits and see what the roots are doing to inform his vineyard management.
Okay.
But this is not the same thing as the flavor that develops through fermentation through to our wine glass. So I'm not saying vineyard geology is not important. It's the taste in the glass that I'm questioning.
Right. Okay.
Does that make sense?
It does. It does. It's great to sort this out, but it is complex. Now, there's been a craze for volcanic wines, volcanic soil wines. Is that just marketing? What is that? You did a blind tasting with volcanic wines. Tell us about that.
Oh, well, that was in Hungary.
Okay.
They're very keen on volcanic wines in Hungary because they've got a lot of volcanic rocks, and it's suddenly, whoa,
Well, you got to sell something.
this is a trendy thing, and Hungary winemakers, bless them, are trying to get their wines on the world map, and it's a battle. A Hungarian wine writer was telling me this the other day. It's dire situation, the competition. So they've got to latch onto whatever they can to try and sell their wines. And because volcanic wines had suddenly become fashionable, they latched onto that. And I went to this conference with a blind tasting. Well, to cut a long story short, it didn't work. It was all over the place.
They couldn't tell. If the
Oh,
wine
I
was
couldn't tell. And
volcanic
the
or not.
same goes for limestone and
Yeah.
granite and everything else. Now, if you can recognize the wine and you know what soil that wine comes from, then you may be able to get the.
That's the
I was at
other
a,
way in. That's
I,
not
I wa-
saying
yeah,
taste
exactly so. I
volcanic,
was at
yeah.
a tasting not long ago, a whole battery of half a dozen different soil types. Can you guess the soil types? It was blind. And the only one that got remotely close was limestone, and quite a few people say, I think this is from limestone. And yeah, it was just about right, but it was Chablis,
Ah,
possibly the most
okay.
distinctive
Sure.
wine of all.
I know Chardonnay, cool, crisp.
Yes, yeah, this is Chablis, and I know Chablis is grown on limestone marly rocks. I think they were guessing because they were guessing it was Chablis rather than limestone. The rest of the wines was all over the place, and every wine tasting I've been to or read about, this has been the case. These things never hold up in truly blind tastings. And there was there's not much incentive for scientists to test this, and so there's not a lot of scientific literature on it. But there was a test in the Netherlands, which I recount in the book, in the limestone chapter, I think. And these geologists had several Dutch growers plant 4 different cultivars, each in different soils, and then try to grow the grapes, vinify the grapes uniformly. Then they sent the finished wines off to a completely independent expert tasting panel. Actually, it was in Germany, Geisenheim. They knew nothing about the test. We've just got all these glasses of wine. Can you put them in any groups? Is there any commonality between any of these anonymous wines? And they could to some extent, but it was the cultivars. They didn't know what the cultivars were by and
Cultivar
large.
meaning the vine type or the clone of the grape?
The vine type,
Vine type, okay.
Yeah, what you'd call a varietal in the wine. Yes, yeah, Pinot Noir, Chardonnay,
Okay.
Cabernet Sauvignon. They're properly called cultivars. Yeah, sorry, that's variety, if you like. Yeah, they recognised the varieties. Oh well, no, they didn't recognise the varieties. They found a commonality between some of the wines. It's because they were from the same variety. Nothing came from the soils. They then repeated the experiment, and this time they used 3 or 4 different yeasts. Again, can you recognize any commonality? And again, they could. They were able to put the wines from a certain yeast in a group. Didn't know what it was, what the yeast was, but yeah, these wines have something in common. These wines have something in common, different yeast. And these wines have something in common. These wines have something in common, different cultivar variety. Soils didn't get a look in. The soils didn't come through at all. The soils apparently were irrelevant, and that is in line with all the blind tasting tests I've read about or be involved in. The claims just don't hold up. But the thing about volcanic wines is, I mean, it's pretty obvious. Volcanic eruptions,
I know, it's sexy.
spectacular.
Whoa.
Oh, absolutely, and that touch of danger, of course, and I mean it's one of the great sights of the geological world without question, a volcanic eruption. And everybody knows that, everybody's seen pictures of it, volcanic wines, whoa. But I have a big problem with the concept. The products of a volcanic eruption, no matter how spectacular, when it all settles down and turns into rock, are just the same as any other rock. It's the same geological minerals. They are made of quartz and feldspar and mica, just like other rocks. There's nothing special. There's nothing magical just because it came out of a volcano. And so why should it give anything special to wines? Again, nobody's ever explained how it works. And I think what gives the game away to me in my cynical mode is if I read tasting notes of a so-called volcanic wine, and volcanic soils are so incredibly varied, how can there be a commonality? Anyway, you can bet if that person writing the tasting notes knows it's from volcanic soils, you will see words like piquancy, pungency, fieriness, incandescence, smoke is a good one.
Smoky, yes.
Some volcanoes look as though they are smoking, but that's
Yes.
fine ash coming out of the volcano. If there is any sort of gases, it's obnoxious sulfur gases, sulfur dioxide, hydrogen sulfur. It's not wood smoke, it's not barbecue smoke, so this wine is smoky from the volcanic soils. No. And as I've indicated, if the person doesn't know it's from volcanic soils, then you're lost. If they do know, then pungency, fieriness comes into the notes. And I just read last week from a very respected UK wine merchant, the May List, it said wines from volcanic soils have a certain piquancy. And I'm sure 99% of readers will just go by, oh yeah, right, okay, good. But to me, oh yes, is that so? Why? Never said. How does it work? And would you be saying that if you didn't know the wine from volcanic soils? I'm afraid when I get in this mode, this phrase flits across my mind, wishful thinking. And this whole thing about volcanic wines and a lot of things, it's wishful thinking. Would that it were, and I wish it were, but I have to go with the evidence, and I can't see how it can be.
Well, I think what does have a certain piquancy is volcanic wine marketing. So that has some piquancy and some fieriness to it. Anyway.
They've got to sell the wines at the end of the day, and it is such a competitive business. You've got to latch on to what you can. Yes. And incidentally, I'll throw in at this point, growing vines and making wines is pretty easy to replicate anywhere, given a decent climate, but not the soil. That's just about the only factor that is very difficult to reproduce somewhere else. And so whatever grower finds he's got a certain soil, he's going to say, our soil is special. That's why our wines are so special, because we've got this unique soil, because he knows it probably is nowhere else, not in detail anyway. Another chapter in the book is about the Australian pioneer called James Busby. And although I think he got quite a lot of things, well, at least questionable, one of the things he did get right in his great 1825 manual was the fact that it occurred to him in travelling in France that the soil type was about the only thing that can't be replicated by other growers, and so producers latch on to that and the specialness of their soils. And he was right. He was right there, and he's right now. You can't blame in this competitive world a producer saying our soils are special, because other people aren't going to say, oh, we got the same soils, because he can probably make a case, but in detail they're a little bit different. It's a great selling point.
It is. Now, just before we leave this and dive into those 4 elephants that have been waiting patiently for us in the other room, so larger layers of rock, of course, aren't contributing anything to vine roots, as they cannot access them or process their inorganic materials or nutrients. However, help me understand this last bit. Isn't soil partly disintegrated rock or geology, and therefore does it contribute some nutrients in that soil that's been fractured or disintegrated, or is it all the vine nutrients are coming from only the organic matter?
Okay, well, this does link in with the first elephant, as it happened, the organic matter. Well, yes, soil is disintegrated rock. It may have formed by fragmentation in place, the local bedrock underneath, or it may have been brought in by wind or rivers or ice from far away, but it's still disintegrated rock. This is true. But the little fragments that make the soil framework are still little chunks of rock, or the geological minerals that make the rock. So you've still got the same problem. The potential vine nutrients are still locked in those little fragments.
Yeah.
And so what's got to happen in this fragmented material, the soil, is that a whole battery of chemical and physical operations have got to get to work, and we sum those up in the word weathering. And through time, weathering may enable some of those constituent elements to be at the surface of the geological mineral and may make it accessible to the soil water, may dissolve in the soil water, and then it can be accessed by the vine roots if the vine roots so choose. Technically speaking, it's a process you may have heard of called cation exchange. We talk about the cation exchange capacity of different minerals. Clays are the most important one, and they can have a lot of loosely held potential nutrients, so-called cations, at their surfaces, and they may detach, get in the soil water, and so they become potential vine nutrients. And if the selectivity mechanisms of the root say, yes, we need you to metabolize, we'll take you in, then yeah, it's a vine nutrient. And they originate in the geology, usually in a geological mineral, and so I call them mineral nutrients because they derived ultimately from the geology. There is, however, on the side one important nutrient which you don't normally call a mineral nutrient because it's not in rocks: nitrogen.
It's in
Rocks
the air,
don't.
right?
Yes, it is in the air. You're dead right. 70% of air is nitrogen, but plants can't access it. The only way plants can get the vital nitrogen is through bacteria in the soil that can capture the nitrogen, and then through microbiological processes can get it into the vine roots. And so here's where the organic fraction of the soil becomes important, the so-called humus.
Humus, as opposed to hummus, the chickpea food.
Humus.
Yes.
Humus.
Humus with a long U, yes. Let's not get it mixed up.
Double M, yeah, nothing to do with hummus.
Right.
Hummus is nicer for humans to eat than humus, but for a plant, it's got to be humus, partly because that's where the nitrogen comes from, and in practice, to a large extent, phosphorus and sulfur, because there's not a lot of those things in rocks and minerals, most rocks and minerals. So important in that respect. But here's the important thing that I argue in the first of those elephants in the room thing. These weathering processes that I've just outlined are slow. They're very, very slow. I mean, if you think of an epitaph on a gravestone, after centuries the epitaph might be becoming indistinct, eventually will disappear because of weathering. Centuries. Now, if a farmer wants to abstract a crop every year, the soil's got to provide a new suite of nutrients each year, and weathering is far too slow to be able to do that. So what happens in nature is, not agriculture, but say in a forest or something like that, the nutrients are recycled. In the fall, the foliage and things fall off, settle, they're decomposed and they're reconstituted, and the nutrients that the previous year's growth are now available for use again. And humus has a far higher cation exchange capacity than any geological mineral. So there they are, being replenished year on year and available, and that's why forests happily grow year on year. In an agricultural situation, the farmer is extracting a crop every season, so if he just keeps doing that without putting anything back, then everybody knows the soil will become depleted, and before long you won't get much in the way of crops. And as I say in this section, I begin it by quoting Woody Guthrie and the dust storms of the American prairies in the 1930s. That's because the overcropping. The farmers weren't putting goodness back in the soil. Now they have to.
Right.
Vines don't need much in the way of nutrients. They have very modest needs, which is why vines can grow on very barren-looking soil. But the organic matter has to be there to some extent, and so the farmer will let foliage and his grape stems rot down in place. He may let weeds or cover crops decay in place, or he may spread a bit of pomace in the vineyard, so the vine gets through the organic matter the vines it needs year on year. Now the corollary of all this, as I see it, coming at it the other way round for the purposes of this elephant in the room, when some wine commentators are saying, yes, I'm getting these minerals from the soil, I'm getting graphite, I'm getting flint, I'm getting talc and stuff from it, because it's been taken up by the vine root and transmitted through to the vine. Well, no, that doesn't happen like that. But in any case, any nutrients that were taken up by the vine root and did make it all the way through to the finished wine, almost certainly in practice will have originated in the humus.
The humus,
For the reasons I said.
But we don't like to talk about rotting leaves and dead bugs.
Of course we don't.
No, that doesn't make for a nice tasting meal.
And I'm not advocating that we should. Rather, I'm advocating that let's rein in this geology thing, that I'm tasting flint and so on, because flint can't be taken up. Flint's inert. It can't get in the wine. If it did, it's insoluble. You'd see little specks in the wine. Well, you don't, obviously. So, no, let's rein in on that. I'm not saying we should start talking about humus, but I think it points up the need to be a little bit more careful, a little bit more precise about when you start talking about things taken up from the soil. So that's the first elephant in the room, humus.
Number 2 elephant, rootstock, as you say, the engine room of the vine, especially those that are resistant to phylloxera, and that was the root louse that devastated European and California vineyards in the 1800s. Most vines today are grafted onto these rootstocks. So the vine is spliced, as I understand it, and attached to the base rootstock, so they grow together as a new plant. But you've said evidence shows that Shiraz vines grafted onto what they call 110 Richter rootstock compared to those grown on their own roots. There are differences in taste and intensity and color and so on. Those rootstocks do have a real impact, this second elephant.
Well, at the time of the phylloxera crisis, and what are we going to do? Our livelihoods and wine are being destroyed and wine's disappearing before our very eyes. Had to find some solution, and one faction argued for grafting onto North American rootstocks as the answer. It was a bit of a battle. Other factions wanted chemical solutions, putting all sorts of nasty stuff in the vineyard, and there was a hybrid faction as well, but the grafting solution won out, and one of the reasons was they advocated or promoted that solution, saying it doesn't affect the wine flavour. The wine flavour isn't affected. The wine flavour is still coming from the Vitis vinifera, the French vines.
The vine on
the
top. That's grafted to the base.
That's still Chardonnay and stuff, and that's what's making it. The rootstocks, they can combat phylloxera, but it doesn't affect the slate, and that's how the taste. That's how the grafting solution was promoted and came to be, and now in much of the world, as you said, is now standard. And the rootstocks bear the names of these pioneers whose name most wine enthusiasts don't know, like, say, Franz Richter that you just mentioned. Well, they really should be known, because if they hadn't come up with this solution, well, we wouldn't have wine in the way we know it today.
Right.
Well, okay, there are a few areas, Chile, South Australia, that still don't have phylloxera, but it's tense. But the point is, over the years, scientific research has shown that the rootstocks can affect the vine flavour. Not in a bad way, it just brings out certain characteristics rather than other characteristics. And I quote some examples in the book, and you mentioned one about Shiraz and Richter. Yeah, they got different end product with that with the Richter rootstocks over own rootstocks, and a whole batteries of these things. So, yeah, the rootstocks apparently do affect the flavour to some extent. So my point is here, shouldn't we be looking at the rootstocks of part of the tasting profile of a wine? They tell us what the varietal was, and maybe something about the climate or whatever, and the winemaker. But rootstocks are never mentioned, but yet it seems they are contributing to the flavour. So I just came up with this elephant in the room phrase. So that's the second elephant in the room.
Absolutely. So our tasting
Rootstocks.
note so far is dead leaves, rotting bugs, and 110 Richter rootstock.
Well,
go buy a case of it.
hey, is this food for thought as I see it?
Absolutely.
I'm not trying to.
Really good. It's great for organizing, and I love it because it's challenging received wisdom, of which there is too much in the wine industry. And if it makes you think, I think that's wonderful. So let's get on to the third elephant.
Well, that's all I'm trying to do. I'm not out to preach or sell anything.
Absolutely.
I'm just laying the situation as I see it. Make of it what you will.
Yep. Absolutely.
The third one,
yeast.
the third one is very parallel to the rootstock argument. Yeast.
Okay. Yeah.
When a winemaker is going to ferment his juice, he's got to make a decision about what yeast he's going to employ. And they manifestly, different yeast strains, affect the fermentation, affect the outcome. And yet we never see yeast mentioned. The only time we see yeast mentioned is if a winemaker has decided to use so-called wild yeast. You might say this wine produced from wild yeast, but that's a bit of a get-out really, because it's not just one wild yeast. There's a whole battery of different species in the different genera of wild yeasts, each of which gives different things. So I'm just saying wild yeast doesn't really take us much further forward. But most winemakers prefer the control you get by bringing in a commercial cultivated yeast. Well, you just glance at a supplier's catalogue, straight away hits you in the face. Our yeast can bring out floral notes, can bring out fruity notes, can do this, can do that. Our yeast strain, blah, blah, technical names again, will make your wine this, make your wine that. So by the same argument as with the rootstocks, if the yeast is that important in making a wine taste like it does, and the winemaker will select a yeast to try and get a wine that he's aiming for, well, shouldn't we as tasters come along and say, well, what kind of yeast was involved? Mm-hmm. Shouldn't we acknowledge part of this fruitiness, part of this esteriness or whatever is due to the yeast? But, as I say, apart from this mention of wild yeast, perhaps, yeast is not mentioned. It's an elephant in the room.
Indeed, and as you say, yeast, of course we know for fermentation, yeast eats the sugars and releases the majority of the compounds that give wine its flavor, sort of the flavor precursors compared to grape juice. Yeast is kind of the difference between grape juice and wine.
It is.
But again, back to that tasting note, we're getting into, rootstock 110 and yeast strain whatever, 26B, what I mean, but it really does have a profound influence.
Yeah.
Our tasting notes are deteriorating meanwhile.
No, I think what I'm saying is calling for tasting notes to be more precise, more careful, not make cavalier remarks, particularly about the vineyard soils. Think about it first.
Absolutely. Okay, I think the biggest elephant sometimes, maybe, perhaps, is consumer psychology, or what? So many factors when it comes to, you've grouped them under psychology, but the wine cost, the color, the origin, rarity, age, critic ratings, tasting ambience, our eating habits, medications we're on, our age, our genes, and so on, all can influence the taste of wine as much as, I would argue, rootstock and yeast and everything else. So what you mentioned a really interesting study about the weight of a bottle and price.
Yeah, I just put that in for a bit of laugh, really. As you say, there's a whole array of these different variables and interesting bits of academic research showing how this particular thing influences our taste perception. There's a good one about music, the music that's playing in the background that is in the book, and all sorts of other things too. I just yeah, brought out that glass thing. There was a little study. There's a very interesting cognitive psychologist at the University of Oxford, Charles Spence. He's done a lot of stuff like this. He did this study with glass, and he and a student, I guess, bought a whole pile of wines from the local supermarket in Oxford. I guess priced between about £5 English, it doesn't matter, Canadian dollars will do, up to about 35 English pounds. So that's a good range of what many people would spend on wine. And they weighed the empty bottles. And they plotted this graph of weight of the bottles against price of the wine. And it was almost a straight line relationship between the weight going up with price. And it came down to, it's a bit laughable, it's a bit of fun really, but nevertheless there's something meaningful behind it.
Absolutely.
For every pound more you spent, the bottle was 8 grams heavier.
So you're buying more glass weight.
So you pay more money, you get more glass. Of course, that was, I think, 2013, that study, and it's a very neat correlation, neat study then. Of course, it's all been put in turmoil a little bit now by the need for sustainability and the move to lighter glasses.
Yes.
I guess it might not work quite so neatly now. But it's not the glass thing that's the point, it's the psychology
Perception.
that people think, oh, heavy bottle, this must be a class wine.
Yeah.
And all these other things that affect our perceptions of taste. Yeah, there are lots of them, which some of them I mention in the book. But I think the bottom line, which again, it's food for thought really, but I finish up that section in the book, it makes you wonder how there's any consistency between wine tastes. There are so many things varying. Well, how is it we're getting all this? And I think, in a word, the answer is placebo. The placebo, the suggestive power of the placebo effect. And I think, except for very confident tasters, perhaps like yourself, Natalie, and maybe a lot of people listening to this, I don't know, but for many wine drinkers, a little bit lacking in confidence about wine, if some wine expert says, well, you'll be getting these notes, and you'll be getting a bit of this, and a bit of that, and a bit of the other, oh, really? Yeah, that's what I'm getting.
That's right.
And that trumps all. It all not trumps. I don't want to say that word. It overrides. I certainly don't want to say it to a Canadian. You know what I mean.
I do.
It overrides all these more academic things about music, weight of the glass, shape of the glass, and the other flowers in the room and what colours are. All that gets subsidiary to the placebo power, rather like a clinician saying, take these tablets, you'll be better. If the wine authority says you're going to taste vanilla, yeah, I'm getting vanilla. And I think that's the bottom line, really. But anyway, food for thought.
I love it. I love it. Now, have you discovered anything since that you might add to a new edition of this book, and/or are you thinking of writing another one? I don't want to exhaust you here. You've just finished this book, but has there anything new that's popped up in your mind, a new curiosity or anything like that?
Oh, well, yeah, there are always new topics to write about, and I've got plenty of ideas for new topics, and I have a new World of Fine Wine article in the pipeline, which isn't in the book. It's about South Africa, about the Cape. Same style, stories and anecdotes about the Cape and so on. And I've got ideas for future things, and so I'm always thinking about new things. But no, there won't be a second edition of this book. This is the present anthology. But we'll see where things go in the future. I'll write more articles. I don't have any plans for a new book, and as you say, this one's only been out a few weeks. In fact, I'm not sure it's out in North America yet. June,
Sure,
I
the
think.
date. It will be by the time this podcast is
Yeah,
published. 'Cause
okay.
we will sync it up for that so that people can order
Okay.
it right after they listen to us, for sure. But no, that's wonderful. So, if you could share a bottle of wine with any person outside the wine world, living or dead, who would that be, Alex?
Oh, killer question. As it happens, I was asked this question not long ago as part of a promotion thing. I said Monty Python.
Oh, really? Have a good laugh?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
They didn't like that because there's no such person as Monty Python. Can't you be more specific? There is a Monty Python sketch, and it's actually delivered by Eric Idle, for what it's worth. But there we go, Monty Python.
What is the sketch? Is it about wine at all? The Eric
Yes,
Idle
yes, it
sketch?
is. Yes,
And
it
what's
is.
the gist of it? Is
Just
it a blind tasting or something?
being funny. No. It's Eric Idle in front of the camera pretending to be a wine expert.
Oh.
And he said, let's share a bottle of this Perth Pink, I think he says. It's known for its astonishing afterburn, I think is what he says. Or we could have a bottle of Chateau something or other. Let's share a bottle of Chateau something. This really is a wine for laying down and forgetting about. Here's a wonderful wine. This is, what is it now? The tennis player, Rod Laver. Coq de Rod Laver. Whoa, he says, 8 bottles of this and you'll know you've enjoyed it. 8 bottles, yeah. So it's just a little face-to-camera sketch.
Classic.
Yeah.
Classic. And is there anything, this has been absolutely wonderful, Alex. Is there anything we haven't covered that you wanted to mention as we wrap up?
Oh, I would just emphasize that I'm just trying to throw out food for thought. I think I'm in an unusual position of knowing about these several different strands.
Indeed.
So as I see it, this is how vines and soil interact. So here's the evidence as I see it. Make of it what you will. I'm not trying to convert people or sell anything or, preach. I know. No, I'm not a campaigner, I'm a teacher. I'm trying to explain things and what people make of it, having thought about it with an open mind. It's your business, dear listener.
Absolutely. Absolutely. You're a thinker and a teacher and a writer and a wanderer, and I hope you keep that going. So, Alex, where can we find you online, you and your books? Do you have a website or social media?
No, people of my age, I don't do the social media thing too much.
That's quite all right. You're not missing anything.
Well, I see people who are, and I say, count me out. It has its part for certain things. I do emails, and I can tell you my email, or you can make it
Only if
available.
you want it to. You may get a lot of emails. It's only if you want to. I know we can get your book from Académie de Vin, which we'll put in the show notes, as well as probably Amazon and other places.
Oh yes, it's all around the world. I see being listed. Yeah.
Great.
It's easy to get hold
All the
of.
bookstores, yeah.
I'm more than happy to converse via email with interested correspondents, genuine. Yeah, more than happy. So as
Interested,
long
polite
as
correspondence.
you can filter out sales things or spam and all that, I'm sure you can.
Sure.
If it's from listeners and nothing more, delighted to. And if anybody thinks, I always say this when I do these presentations, live or otherwise, if anybody thinks, well, he's missing something, he's not talked about that, he's missing the. please tell me what it is. I would love geology to be incredibly important. I would love all you listeners to have to study geology. So if I am missing something, and geology is important after all, and it may turn out to be so in the fullness of time as science progresses. That's the nature of science. I just can't see what direction that might be. But if somebody does want to suggest I'm missing something, I'd be delighted to hear it. But any questions, any queries, discussion points? Yeah, I love it. I love it.
Well, you heard it. So, folks, you can email me. I'll put you in touch with Alex. If you have a question along that vein, you can email me, Natalie@nataliemclean.com, and I will connect you. Alex, thank you so much. This has been wonderful. I have learned so much. My mind is throbbing in a good way.
So's mine.
That's because I kept you so long.
No.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate this. Thank you for the work you've done and for the clarity you bring to this subject. We really appreciate it.
Okay, absolutely my pleasure, Natalie. And thank you, everybody, for listening and watching.
Oh, cheers. Now, don't log off, but I'll say cheers and goodbye for now, Alex.
Yep, cheers.
Okay. All right.